Snow filled the world to the edges of the windshield. The mountain pass was a white throat, narrow and wind-scoured, the sky a hard, colorless glare that flattened shadows and made depth a guess at best. The small convoy crawled through it in single file. For armored trucks, engines rumbling, tires grinding over packed snow, and chains chattering against hidden ice. Inside the lead vehicle, a young driver hunched over the wheel, eyes narrowed under his glasses. In the command truck behind him, a two-star general gripped a hand mic with gloved fingers and leaned forward as if he could physically force the static to resolve into words. Convoy Gold, this is Phoenix Actual. Radio check. Say again, radio check. His voice was already edged with irritation. The only reply was a hiss of white noise, broken by a couple of stuttering pops of digital distortion. The general's jaw flexed. "Sir, I'm still getting heartbeat from Phoenix Station," the signal sergeant said from the rear seat, frowning at his tablet. "But the voice channels are trash. Could be terrain shadow." "We've been in shadow for 15 minutes, the general snapped. "I want a relayed status from the outpost as soon as we clear this cut. I am not walking into that governor's office late and blind." Outside, the mountains towered, cliffs of rock and ice rising on both sides. Wind whipped loose snow into streamers that snaked across the road and sent a constant hiss against the hull. The convoy's movement seemed to disturb the mountains themselves. Little puffs of powder broke free from ledges high above and drifted down like lazy ghosts. From the third vehicle, one of the bodyguards glanced up at the ridgeline and didn't like what he saw. Nothing. No birds, no loose rockfall, no grazing goats or distant villagers on the high trails. Just stillness. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. The general didn't appreciate nerves. The road curved, tightening, forcing the convoy closer to the inner wall where it bent like a frozen river. Ahead, the pass kinked, visibility shrinking. The driver muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. In a command truck, the general clicked the radio again. "Phoenix Station, confirm meetings still on schedule. I need." The world ahead of them turned into light. The lead vehicle vanished in a detonation of white and black and jagged steel. Snow and rock exploded upward in a geyser, the blast wave slamming into the command truck like a giant hand. Windows shattered inward, the windshield crazing into a spiderweb. The driver's head snapped sideways as the truck shuddered to a halt, its view ahead filled with a wall of flame, smoke, and tumbling wreckage. Almost simultaneously, far behind them, a second explosion rocked the pass. The rear truck leapt into the air, chassis torn open, wheels flung like toys. The narrow road became a sealed coffin. Fire on both ends, smoke mushrooming against the cliff faces, echoing in one long, rolling roar. "Contact! Contact!" The bodyguard in the seat next to the general wasn't aware he was screaming. He reached for the general with one hand and his rifle with the other. The general sat stunned for half a second, then instincts kicked in. Out! Get him out of the truck!" The protective detail leader shouted, his words nearly swallowed by the blast echo. Someone grabbed the general's arm and hauled him sideways. Gunfire came a heartbeat later. It started as scattered pops. Then the ridgeline lit up in muzzle flashes. Automatic bursts raked along the snow, chewing it into exploding plumes just over the convoy's roofline. Disciplined single shots cracked through the air, snapping past helmets and punching into thin armor plates with sharp, mean thuds. The pass had teeth now. Up high! Up high! A corporal yelled from the second truck as he threw his door open and jumped into the snow. The cold knifed through his pants instantly. Bullets slapped into the door he'd just vacated, stitching it with holes. The protective detail moved on drilled muscle memory. Two guards flanked the general, practically lifting him off the floor, shoving him toward the nearest cover, a shallow ditch at the base of the cliff where the snow had drifted thinner. He stumbled into it, boots sliding, one hand clamped on his cap, the other still oddly clutching the useless radio mic. "Where's my comms?" he barked, half-crouched as snow kicked up around him from incoming fire. A radio operator dropped into the ditch beside him, hand pressed to the earpiece inside his helmet. "Sir, all channels dead. I've got nothing not." His sentence broke off with a wet grunt as a round hit him low in the chest. He folded sideways, the handset slipping from his hand, cable curling in the snow. Blood seeped out into the white, shockingly bright. The general stared at him, then at the radio, then up at the ridges where the gunfire stitched invisible lines. "Sir, we've got to move you," shouted one of the bodyguards, planting himself between the general and the direction the rounds seemed to be coming from. He racked his rifle, leaned out over the lip of the ditch, and squeezed off a short burst at a muzzle flash. Above them, the enemy had the angles. The positions were staggered. A line of fighters on the left ridge firing down into the truck's flanks, another line on the right ridge taking advantage of crossfire, with a few higher still, almost silhouettes against the sky. Whoever planned it knew exactly where the convoy would be when the explosives went off. On the far right ridge, a machine gun opened up, the deeper, saw-like roar of a belt-fed weapon cutting through the chaotic noise. Its rounds plowed furrows along the road, walking toward the ditch where the general and his detail had taken shelter. The protection team fired back, but their rounds chewed harmlessly into rock and snow. They were shooting at flashes, guesses. The high ground had all the definition. Down here, in the bowl of the pass, everything above blended into glare and shadow. A small drone buzzed overhead, almost dainty in the chaos. It circled beyond easy rifle range, its rotors whispering, a glass eye tilting to survey the carnage. It didn't attack. It simply watched, calm and clinical like someone taking notes. The general saw it between bursts of gunfire and felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't some opportunistic cell rolling a dice with homemade bombs. This was planned. Someone wanted him. Someone knew exactly where he'd be, when he'd be there, and what vehicle he'd be in. "Get that damned thing down," one of the bodyguards shouted, throwing a few futile shots at the drone. The rounds passed beneath it, carving little vapor trails in the frigid air. The machine gun's roar grew louder as it found its range. Snowburst impacts crept along the ditch, edging closer to the general's boots. A young sergeant beside him slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle, fumbled to reload with stiff fingers, and then nothing. He slapped the bottom of the magazine, realizing with horror that he'd miscounted. The mag he grabbed was already empty. His hand shook as he tossed it and clawed at his chest rig for another. The machine gunner on the ridge leaned into his weapon, finger tightening, seeing movement in the ditch. He adjusted his aim lower, barrel settling on the slight rise where the general's head would pop into view if he tried to move. Down below, the world shrank to breath, frost, and the panicked scramble of hands trying to find ammunition. Then a single shot cracked through the air. Different from the others. Sharper, almost clean. It didn't come from the road. It didn't come from any of the known positions. High up on the left ridge, the machine gunner's head snapped back. His helmet jumped, and he slumped sideways, hands jerking open. The heavy weapon spat one last uncontrolled burst into the sky, then pitched off its mount and tumbled into the snow. For a heartbeat, everything hesitated. Some of the fighters on that side ducked, confused. The general's eyes widened. The sergeant with the empty magazine froze, hand halfway to his chest. "Where the hell did that come from?" someone muttered. He didn't get an answer, but the unseen rifle did. Another crack echoed across the pass, precise and composed. On the right ridge, an RPG gunner who'd just risen from behind a rock, launcher on his shoulder and eyes locked on the command truck, jerked as a round punched through the space just below his eye. He toppled backward, the rocket skidding harmlessly into the snow as his team shouted in shock. The general pushed up on one elbow, craning his neck, searching the cliff faces. He saw only glimpses. A gloved hand working the bolt of a rifle, metal sliding with a smooth, practiced motion. A breath hanging in the freezing air, frost crusting the edge of a mask. The faint, angular outline of a limb that didn't move quite like flesh. A carbon fiber lower leg planted into a pocket of snow on some precarious little ledge no sane person would stand on. Then that shape was gone, swallowed by rock and white. Another enemy shooter on the upper ridge dropped, chest caving inward as a hidden round found him. Fire from that flank stuttered, then thinned. Where chaos had been thick and one-sided, little pockets of silence began to appear, each one carved out by an unseen hand at long range. The drone overhead wobbled slightly as it tried to orient to the new threat, camera tilting toward the high spur, where the mystery shots seemed to originate. It hung there, trying to fix the angle. Down in the ditch, the general's breath came in ragged clouds. Snow and dirt flecked his uniform, clinging to the stars on his collar. He clutched the useless radio mic like a talisman, eyes scanning the ridges. "Who's up there?" one of the bodyguards whispered, more to himself than anyone else. No one answered, but the results were visible. Fire that had been unrelenting grew cautious. A few enemy fighters shifted position, suddenly aware they might be silhouetted. The perfect geometry of their ambush began to warp as invisible hands plucked key nodes out of the shape. The pass, moments ago a sealed kill box, now held something else, an anomaly. A guardian they hadn't counted on. The general felt it, the tactical equation tilting by degrees. Someone out there, above him, knew the terrain even better than the ambushers. Someone was rewriting the script in real time and using their own ridges against them. Wind roared, pushing smoke and snow into new patterns. The drone circled, searching. The convoy, trapped between burning vehicles, tried to breathe in a little hope. Far above, the faint outline of that carbon fiber limb shifted as its owner settled deeper into cover. Rifle snugged into a shoulder, sights moving with patient intent. The mountains seemed to hold their breath. And then everything cut to black. 12 hours earlier, the mountains were still quiet. Dawn slid across their ridgelines like a slow spill of pale metal, turning peaks into silhouettes and snowfields into vast sheets of dull, pearly light. The forward outpost clung to one of the lower ridges. A scatter of prefabs and tinted structures huddled around a cluster of antennas and a single tall mast bristling with comms gear. Breath plumed from every mouth that stepped outside, thin and white. Generators hummed a steady, comforting note beneath the wind. Antennas wore crusts of ice like brittle jewelry. Every now and then a chunk broke free and crashed down onto the packed snow below with a sound sharp enough to make jumpy boots flinch. Inside the operations tent, it was warmer, but only barely. The air smelled of coffee, nylon, and old electronics. Staff Sergeant Nadia Rios shifted her weight slightly from one leg to the other, feeling the familiar, dull ache where hard socket met scar tissue. The prosthetic beneath her uniform pants was a clean piece of engineering. Carbon fiber with a reinforced ankle, she'd painstakingly adjusted herself for this kind of terrain, but no amount of tech could remove the ghost sensations that crept in when she'd been standing too long. She pushed the discomfort aside and focused on the images glowing on the wall of screens in front of her. Satellite stills, drone footage, patrol reports overlaid in translucent color on topographical maps. The route to the provincial capital was a thin, crawling line through the frozen geometry of the range, marked by little icons for checkpoints, probable choke points, and known avalanche zones. Nadia zoomed in on a particular section, the pass that tightened like a noose around the road. She flicked between yesterday's drone sweep and the one from 3 days prior. "Stop there," she murmured, mostly to herself. She toggled back and forth. Right there, on the upper left ridge of the pass, where no friendly patrols had logged movement in weeks due to sheer drop-offs and unstable snow, there were faint new lines in the surface. Not the random scars of wind. These were more purposeful, linear, with little curves where feet had tested footing. Tracks, partly erased by later drifts. She highlighted them with a finger. "Problem, Sarge?" asked the signals tech beside her, glancing over. "Tracks where there shouldn't be tracks," she said. "No friendly signatures on that ridge." He shook his head. "Nothing on the books. That slope is basically do not step, according to the safety brief. Too steep, too much cornice above it." Nadia grunted softly. She flicked to another camera angle, this one an infrared sweep. Near a supposedly abandoned shepherd trail on the opposite side, A cluster of residual heat signatures glowed faintly. Recent campfires, long since doused, but still warmer than the surrounding snow. Whoever set those wasn't out there watching goats, she muttered. On another screen, a brief glitch caught her eye. A drone feed, passing over the pass the previous afternoon, fuzzed out just as it crossed the narrowest portion of the road. The image broke into static for 2 seconds, then snapped back with a slight shift in angle, as if the craft had climbed a meter or two in that short blind window. She rewound it twice, watching the framing shift. Interference, the signals tech offered. Maybe, Nadia said, or someone pointing something unfriendly at our bird. She marked the timestamps, annotated the map with 3 little red circles. The high ridge tracks, the Shepherd Trail heat signatures, the drone glitch. The tent flap opened with a rush of cold air and rank breath from outside. Conversations died quickly as people turned. A colonel stepped aside to allow the visiting general to enter. He carried the presence of someone used to rooms pivoting around him. Tall, barrel-chested under his winter jacket, silver at the temples, eyes that took everything in with quick, impatient flicks. Snow dusted his shoulders. At ease, he said, almost as an afterthought, while already moving toward the largest table in the center. Chairs scraped. People gathered. The generator hum seemed to recede. "We're on a clock," the general said, glancing at his watch. "Governor Kareem expects me in his office by 1300 local. The security agreement we signed today sets the tone for the next 6 months. I am not rescheduling it because of a forecast or a gut feeling." Clear. There was a chorus of "Roger, sir," around the table. Nadia didn't say anything yet. She watched him mark the route with his finger, following the same little line she'd been staring at for hours. "We move as one element," he continued. "No staggered movement that just stretches us out into a longer target. For vehicles, 2 security elements front and rear. My team in the second truck. We've driven this road dozens of times. Enemy activity in the area has ticked up in the last week, sir," one of the staff officers ventured. "Rocket potshots at night. Intermittent small arms fire from the far ridges. They always tick up before big meetings," the general said, dismissing it with a shrug. "They like to remind us they're here. That's why we're going with an armored package and why I'm bringing you lot instead of a handshake team. But we move." Understood. It was the moment to speak. Nadia's heart rate, which had stayed steady through firefights and evacuation drills, spiked slightly. "Sir," she said. Multiple heads turned toward her. The general's gaze landed on her rank patch, then flicked to her face, then flicked down very briefly to the subtle angle of her right pant leg where the outline of the prosthetic was a fraction less rounded than the other side. "Yes, Sergeant." "Rios, sir," she said. "I've been reviewing yesterday's drone feeds and the last week of patrol reports." "Good. That's why we have analysts." His tone skated the edge between approval and condescension. "What's your assessment?" She tapped the screen with the highlighted anomalies. "There are fresh tracks along the northern ridge of the pass. No friendly patrols logged there. Infrared picked up residual heat signatures near the old Shepherd Trail on the south side. And we had a 2-second interference event when a drone passed directly over the narrowest point. Interference can be weather," someone said. "It was clear sky during that sweep," Nadia replied without looking away from the general. "No storm. No cloud cover." The general studied the images for a moment, lips pressing together. Then he exhaled through his nose. "What's your recommendation?" he asked. "Adjust the route," she said. "Shift 20 clicks west, take the river valley. It adds 40 minutes, but we avoid that pass. If that's not acceptable, at least break the convoy into 2 elements with a 10-minute separation. And increase overwatch. Leave an element on the high ridge above the choke point." There was a pause. Some in the room weighed her words, others clearly already calculating the inconvenience. "The river valley floods with melt by midday," the colonel pointed out. "We be pushing it, sir." The general shook his head slightly. "We already have the governor lined up. Media, local broadcasters, the whole performance. I am not moving the time. There are also reports," Nadia continued, "of local villagers avoiding that pass the last 3 days. They've been taking longer, harder trails around it instead of the usual shortcut. That doesn't happen spontaneously. Villagers are superstitious, the general said. They avoid routes if a goat stumbles the wrong way. With respect, sir, Nadia said quietly, goats don't cause 2-second interference spikes on encrypted drone feeds. A couple of staff officers traded looks. One smirked. The signals tech beside Nadia sank a little into his chair. The general set his hands on the table, leaning over the map. He was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lighter, but the edge in it was sharper. Sergeant Rios, he said, you've been up here how long? 6 months at this outpost, sir, she replied. And how many of those months have you spent behind that wall of screens instead of in a dismount stack? The question was rhetorical. Everyone in the room knew at least the outlines of her story. Enough to know what I'm seeing, she said anyway. He gave a small, humorless chuckle. Look, I appreciate the vigilance. I do. But I'm not rerouting an entire operation based on what might be tracks and what might be old fire pits. The pass has been used safely for weeks. It's also the perfect kill zone, Nadia said, the words out before she could stop them. If I were them, and I had even one informant in our chain, that's where I'd hit us. That earned a couple of sharper glances. The word informant hung in the air like something sour. We vetted the local contractors extensively, the colonel said quickly. Extensively, the general echoed. Sergeant, sometimes when you stare at ghosts long enough, they look real. Be careful not to build an ambush where there's just emptiness. He flicked his gaze back to her leg, just for a heartbeat. And as for perfect kill zones and keeping up on ice, he added, his voice dropping into conversational cruelty, we have to balance the ideal with the realistic. The men on that convoy have to be able to scramble up those ridges if something does happen. He gestured vaguely at her lower half. It's not reasonable to redesign an entire plan because one person can't move as freely on that terrain. Understood. The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was worse, little bursts, quickly strangled, eyes darting away. A few of the younger officers looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. Nadia stood very still. She felt the familiar flush start at her neck, hot under the collar, and forced herself to breathe slowly. Fear and anger could ride the same nerve. She'd learned to break that circuit years ago. Understood, sir, she said. The briefing moved on. Timings, call signs, rules of engagement. The convoy's departure was fixed, the route unaltered. The anomalies on her screen sat in the corner, small red circles around what everyone had decided were ghosts. When the meeting broke, people peeled off in little groups. A younger lieutenant, Reed, second tour, hung back and fell in a step beside her as she headed toward the exit. That was out of line, he murmured under his breath. Which part? Nadia asked. The part where I saw something and said something? Or the part where I was reminded I only have 1.5 original legs? He winced. You know, that's not how he meant it. It's exactly how he meant it, she said quietly. It's fine. I've heard worse. They stepped out into the knife-edge cold. The air out here was clean in a way that hurt the nose. Down the slope, the motor pool bustled as vehicles were checked, chains tightened, hatches slammed. He does trust you, Reed insisted. Just not for this kind of thing. He reads your file and sees that ambush outside Shadara. The mortar hit the scrambled evac. Higher up decided it was a bad call, and that sticks. He reads the top line and not the after action, Nadia said. He sees lost a leg and deviation from plan and stops reading when the paragraph gets uncomfortable. That happens. You pulled your team out of that crater, Reed pointed out. Even the colonel says. Yeah, well, stories get shorter every time they're retold, Nadia said. Don't worry about it, Lieutenant. Go make sure your guys have their cold weather gloves. He hesitated, then nodded and jogged away. The armory was warmer than ops, full of the smell of oil and metal. Racks of rifles stood in orderly rows. On the far bench, a long gun lay disassembled, its pieces aligned like parts of some precise puzzle. Nadia drifted toward it almost unconsciously. Her hands settled on the familiar shape of the stock, the receiver, the long barrel. The nameplate read a serial number she knew by heart. You're not on a rifle today, Rios, The armorer said from behind the counter without looking up. "You're on screens and radios." "I know," she said. "Just making sure this one's still zeroed." "You checked it yesterday." "I'll check it again." She reassembled the rifle in practiced motions, letting the sequence occupy her thoughts. Bolt carrier, firing pin, springs. She held it up, sighted along the barrel at a scuff mark on the far wall. For a moment, the armory fell away. She smelled dust instead of snow, heard the distant thump of mortars instead of generator hum. The flashback came in quick, blurred frames. The mountain village below them, the sudden whistling overhead, the blast that threw her sideways and up, the sensation of flying without control. The moment she looked down and realized something was wrong with the way her leg ended. She cut it off with a deliberate breath. The past could be examined when it was useful. This wasn't that. Later, as she walked across the yard, she paused by the motor pool. A local supply truck idled nearby, its driver hunched behind the wheel, cap low, shoulders tight. The man kept his eyes on the dash, even as the general's aide supervised loading a heavy metal case into the rear of the command truck. The case was matte gray, the kind that looked almost anonymous in a stack of gear, but which weighed more than it seemed. The driver's gaze flicked up once, landing on the case, then darted away. His fingers drummed on the steering wheel in a meaningless rhythm. When he caught Nadia watching him, he dropped his hands, tensed, and stared straight ahead. She filed the detail away like she did with everything else. Nervous locals were nothing new. But nervous locals who avoided looking at specific pieces of cargo were worth remembering. In a calm shack, she found a signal sergeant bent over a bank of equipment, frowning. "Again?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, gesturing at a graph on his screen. "They're doing it smarter, though. Short spikes. Pings. Couple seconds of jam here, couple seconds there, different frequencies. Harder to track, easier to dismiss as glitches. It's like they're bracketing us, figuring out how we react." "And higher says," she asked. "Harassment," he said in a flat voice. "We logged it. We got a will monitor. But until somebody loses a toy for more than a few minutes, it's all background noise." Nadia looked over his shoulder at the data, the peaks of interference like little teeth biting into the clean lines. "Background noise is how you hide the real song," she said quietly. He gave her a sideways look. "You really should have gone into metaphors instead of the army." "Did once," she said. "Didn't pay as well." When the convoy engines finally rumbled to life under the pale mid-morning sun, she stood off to the side, map case tucked under one arm, radio clipped to her vest. Snow glittered off the hoods. Exhaust plumes made the air shimmer. She watched each truck in turn. The general's command vehicle, the forward and rear security elements, the case being secured inside. She traced their route in her mind's eye, overlaying it with the anomalies she'd marked earlier. "Sergeant Rios," the colonel called, stepping over. "You're at checkpoint 2 today. Log every vehicle that comes through, bounce relevant traffic you can still pull off these damn mountains, and keep the coffee hot." "Simple day." "Understood, sir," she said. He gave her an almost apologetic smile. "We'll be back before dark." "Hope so," she said. As the convoy rolled out, tires crunching over the frozen surface, she stayed where she was for a moment, watching the taillights shrink against the white. Then she turned to the map on her tablet, zooming in on the pass. She didn't need to imagine how she would stage the ambush if she were the enemy. She already had. "You'd put the charges here and here," she thought, fingers hovering over the road. "Enough to block both exits. You'd use jammers you've already tested to cut their comms. You'd put shooters here, here. Overwatch sniper there. And if you wanted someone alive." Her gaze tracked to a narrow gap in the ridgeline where a reinforced sled could be dragged, where a single, hard route up and over would take a capture team away from any quick response unit trying to give chase. She exhaled slowly through her teeth. The Engine sound faded. The outpost returned to its usual hum. On paper, she was rear security. In reality, she felt like someone who'd just watched a train pass the last functioning signal before the tracks disappeared into fog. Midday found the convoy threading its way through the mountains under a sky so clear it almost hurt. Sunlight bounced off every surface, doubling itself, turning the snow into a mirror that made distance hard to judge. The soldiers in the trucks wore tinted goggles and joked in that easy, clipped way that sat on top of real anxiety. "Bet the governor's office has real chairs," someone said in the rear truck. "Not these spine-killing torture devices." "Bet the governor's daughter has questions about foreign culture," another added, to low laughter. "Bet the governor's staff has no idea we nearly crashed 3 times on the way over," the driver muttered. In the command truck, the general rode with his helmet resting on his knees for the moment, rubbing at the bridge of his nose. A file folder lay open beside him, papers clipped neatly, dotted with translations and margin notes. "Remind me," he said to his aide, "what the local time is for their midday prayer." 1300, sir," the aide replied. "Same as the meeting start. So if we're late, we walk in after a prayer and before cameras," the general said. "We are not going to be late." He reached for the radio handset, reflex, and heard the familiar static hiss. "Phoenix Station, this is Phoenix Actual, how copy?" The reply was faint, broken. "Nick's reading, low break terrain." "Say again," he said, frustration rising. In the rear seat, the signals sergeant frowned down at his displays. "We're getting bounce," he said. "Signal strength shouldn't be this low yet. Might be terrain, might be—" He didn't finish. The general's eyes narrowed. "Terrain shadowing here?" he asked. "On this stretch." "Shouldn't be, sir," the sergeant admitted. The road angled downward slightly, curving into the approach to the pass. The walls rose on both sides, bit by bit, like someone closing fingers around them. At checkpoint 2, lower on a different ridge, Nadia sat at a folding table in a small plywood shelter, a thermos of coffee steaming beside her, logbook open. A local fuel truck had passed an hour earlier. Since then, nothing. She checked her watch. There should have been 3 more civvy vehicles by now, at least. The mountain road was the only link between 2 clusters of villages. Even in winter, there was always traffic. She stood, stepped out into the cold, and scanned the road that snaked along the valley below. Empty. No distant engines. No slow-moving points of color against the white. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. She raised her binoculars and swept the ridges, not just the road. On a high flank far away, a small puff of snow erupted from a ledge with no visible cause. She tracked to another slope and caught the brief glint of glass, a lens then gone. Phones, scopes, or both. She went back into the shelter, grabbed her map, and started marking the places her instincts tugged at. Not sightings exactly, just subtle wrongnesses, a straight line in a landscape of curves, a shadow where the angle of the sun said there shouldn't be one. Her radio crackled, then hissed, then went silent. She adjusted the dials, tried a different frequency. "Phoenix Convoy, this is checkpoint 2, radio check." Nothing, not even static this time, just dead air. She swallowed, tried again. "Phoenix Convoy, this is checkpoint 2, say again, radio check." Silence. Back on the road in the command truck's cab, the protective detail's radios fizzed in and out, bits of words getting through and then dissolving into noise. The drivers exchanged uneasy looks. "Must be terrain," one said, not believing it. On a high rocky shelf overlooking the pass, 2 men in winter camouflage crouched behind a tripod-mounted device. One held the handles of a compact generator, thumb hovering over the starter. The other watched a small screen with little blocks of text and numbers. "Now," the second man said calmly. The first yanked. The generator coughed to life, its murmur quickly swallowed by the wind. The device on the tripod pulsed. Invisible waves rolled outward, washing over rock and snow and metal. In the command truck, every radio in the vehicle spat one last burst of nonsense and then cut out as if someone had thrown a switch. "All channels dead, sir," the signal sergeant said after a frantic beat of flipping toggles. "Not just low. Dead." "This is exactly what I did not want," the general growled. "Driver, pick it up. We clear this pass. We recover signal. He didn't finish the sentence. Far ahead, just as the lead vehicle crested the narrowest section between 2 bulging cliffs, the mountain opened its jaws. The buried charge under the hardpack went off with a blinding flash and a booming crack that seemed to tear the air itself. The truck's nose flew upward, plate steel folding. Engine block ripped from its mounts. The vehicle lifted off the road, turned in slow, horrible degrees, and slammed back down sideways across the lane, its roof partially crushed. Shards of metal spun away, hissing through the snow. A shockwave punched through the command truck. People inside were thrown against straps and seats, breath knocked out of them. In the rear, the last truck in line had barely begun to brake when the second explosive under its rear axle detonated. The blast shredded tires and suspension. The chassis lurched downward, then sideways, twisting and scraping the cliff face. The road behind them disappeared behind fire and smoke. Snow poured down from the cliffs, shaken free in sheets by the twin concussions. For a moment, the pass vanished in a maelstrom of white, brown, and black. Nadia heard it at checkpoint 2 before the radios picked up anything. A deep, dull thump that rolled down the valleys and shivered through her boots. An instinct older than her uniform made her spine stiffen. She grabbed her radio, thumbed the transmit button. Phoenix Convoy, this is checkpoint 2. Say again, Phoenix Convoy, radio check. Static, not even that. There was only a faint, strangled buzz, like the system itself was being smothered. Something cold settled under her sternum. She stepped outside, lifting her binoculars again. The ridges around the unseen pass were suddenly alive. Tiny figures shifted where there had been empty slopes an hour before. Snow plumes burst from sudden movements. She saw a line of men in winter camouflage hustling from behind a rock outcropping, hauling something heavy and rectangular between them. A sled. Her fingers tightened on the binoculars. Her other hand found a map case by reflex, flipping it open on the nearby table. "Come on," she muttered. "Where are you?" She marked the position she could see, extrapolated the ones she couldn't. 2 tiers of shooters on the north face. A probable sniper perch on an isolated pinnacle. The sled team moving toward a section of cliff with a narrow, nasty ramp behind it. The only route that would take them up and over if they wanted to disappear into the backcountry with a prisoner. Her radio crackled to life suddenly. Not with the convoy's call sign, but with the outposts. Checkpoint 2, Phoenix Station. We just lost voice contact with a convoy. You got eyes? Yes, Nadia snapped. I'm seeing multiple dismounts along the ridges around the pass. The patterns match an ambush. Something just blew big up there. Stay at your checkpoint. Came another voice over the channel. Different tone. Staff, we may have decoy action. We need that choke point at 2 held. She stared at the handset. Sir, if they're hitting the pass, the decoy is the meeting. They're going after the principal. I need to get a high ground. You're assigned rear security, Sergeant. The staff voice cut in sharper now. Do not compromise the operational layout because of a boom in the distance. Hold your position. The frequency flattened. Someone had killed the channel. Nadia stood very still for 2 seconds. The wind gusted around her shelter, lifting little spirals of snow at her feet. Somewhere above the pass, men she'd watched drive away that morning were now either fighting for their lives or already dead. Protocol said, stay. Protect the line of communications. Do not self-assign. Her eyes dropped to her leg. The familiar, quiet anger rose, not at the limb, but the way it had become shorthand for how people thought they could use her. Fine, she said to no one. She grabbed her rifle from the corner, slung it over her shoulder, and stuffed extra magazines into her vest until it was tight around her ribs. The map case went over her back. She unclipped the radio from the table and tethered it to herself instead. Outside, the GO track she'd reconned on her own time wound up the ridge behind checkpoint 2, a narrow, icy zigzag that most of the outposts considered off-limits because it went nowhere anyone had ever needed to go. Nadia had needed to. She started up it without looking back. The first few meters weren't bad, just steep and slick. Her prosthetic found purchase where her real foot skidded and vice versa. She adjusted, falling into a rhythm she had carved in her muscles over years of retraining. Halfway up the first switchback, she slipped. Her metal foot hit a patch of bare ice under a dusting of powder, the carbon edge skittering. Pain stabbed up through the socket as the limb twisted against scar tissue. Her real knee buckled. For a second, she felt the old vertigo from Shah Dara, the sensation of the ground yanked out from under her. She dropped low, hands slapping the snow, breath hissing through her teeth. The rifle banged against her chest. Fear flickered. She acknowledged it, filed it, moved. She reached down with her glove and flipped a small lever on the side of the prosthetic's ankle joint, tightening it to reduce play. The crampon-like teeth, she'd had the base fitted with bit a little deeper into the next step. One at a time, she told herself. Left, then right. Pain is just information. Use it later. Keep moving now. Above the pass, the ambush tightened its grip. Survivors from the convoy had thrown themselves out of vehicles and into whatever depressions they could find. Some hugged the lee side of the trucks. Others dove behind snow berms, scraped from plowing. A bodyguard in the second truck shoved the general bodily into a shallow ditch by the cliff wall, landing on top of him as rounds hissed overhead. "We're in the kill zone," someone shouted. "They've got the high ground." "Where's that fire coming from?" The general barked, though he could see well enough that it was coming from everywhere. Rifles rattled as his team fired upward at the flares of muzzle flash. Snow around them exploded in little eruptions. A man near the rear screamed, clutching his thigh where a round had torn through. Somewhere on the left ridge, a fighter with a scope swept it along the line of vehicles, pausing when he saw the distinctive rank patch on the general's chest. He smiled behind his scarf, adjusted his position, and settled in. Nadia was still climbing. The track narrowed until it was no longer a discernible path, just convenient handholds in a wall of snow and rock. She pressed herself close, feeling the chill leach into her, using her prosthetic like an ice tool. She drove its reinforced foot into the crust, hooked it, and used it as a pivot to swing herself up. Her breath puffed hard from her mouth, steaming in the cold. The air up here was thinner. Her heart hammered in her ears. She forced her hands to move calmly, methodically. At one point, a chunk of the ice wall broke free under her weight. It tore away with a gut-dropping crack. She reacted without thought, slamming her shoulder against the remaining slope, digging the metal foot deeper, riding the little avalanche as it poured down below her. Snow roared past, dragging at her thigh. For a moment, her good foot dangled in empty space. Her fingers screamed in her gloves as they clung to a protruding rock. The rifle strap dug into her chest. Then the slide ended. Snow settled. She hung there, panting, body shaking with adrenaline. Still here, she told herself. Still here. Move. She clawed the last meters to the top of the spur and flopped behind a rock, boots kicking up powder. For a few seconds she lay there, staring at the sky, heart slamming against her ribs. The edge of the prosthetic's socket pulsed with sharp little jabs where the earlier twist had irritated old wounds. She rolled onto her stomach, unlimbered the rifle, and peered over the edge. From up here, the pass was no longer a claustrophobic tunnel. It was a bowl. The road cut through its base like a black scar between mounds of white. The lead vehicle lay on its side, burning. Smoke rose thick and black, staining the air. The rear truck was angled badly, back end torn open. Small shapes crawled in the snow. Her people flinging themselves into cover, returning fire at angles that didn't favor them. Muzzle flashes sparked from at least 3 different elevations on the north face, 2 on the south, and 1 high, solitary speck on an isolated pinnacle. That one moved slower, more deliberately. Sniper, she thought. Overseer. She lifted her binoculars first, scanning the other slopes. There, a cluster of fighters in heavier gear crouched behind a rock stack on a higher terrace, packs beside them. One carried a coil of rope. Another checked the straps on a tough-looking sled. She caught the glint of metal in a bundle of restraints. Capture team, she realized. They don't want him dead. Not yet. She shifted her gaze. Near a mound of rocks covered by a camouflage tarp, she saw cable reels, a compact generator chugging away, and the distinctive antenna array of a high-power jammer spearing up like a hostile plant. Beside it, a man in a thicker jacket and a headset barked orders into a microphone, gesturing at the device, tweaking its settings. That's what's cutting their lifeline. She clicked the radio on her chest, tried a different band. Phoenix Station, this is Rios. I have eyes on the pass. Ambush in progress. Multiple enemy positions on both ridges. They have a jammer on a north face, elevation. She eyeballed it from the map. Approximate grid. Static. A flicker of a voice, then a squeal, then nothing. She looked down at the radio's tiny battery indicator. It had dropped faster than it should in that climb, the cold sucking life out of it. If she burned cycles trying to break through the jammer, she'd kill her only communication before it mattered. Pick your fights, she told herself. She pulled out her map and started sketching quickly, marking each enemy position she could see and where she guessed the unseen ones would be to create the pattern of fire she was watching. The sniper on the pinnacle, first on her list. The jammer team leader, second. Heavy machine guns, third, fourth. RPG cells, fifth. The drone operator, if she could spot him, sixth. The capture team and anyone going for the general, last, but only because killing them too early might push the enemy into a kill-everything fallback plan. She slotted a magazine into the rifle, feeling the weight of it. For full mags. One partial. Enough to ruin the right people's day, but not enough to waste a single shot. She took one long breath, feeling it fill her chest, then let it out slowly. The screaming wind, the distant gunfire, the faint thump of her own pulse. They all faded to a background hum. The sniper on the pinnacle came first. He was nested behind a rock, weapon resting on a bipod, glued to his scope. From his vantage, he had the whole road. He'd already dropped two men who tried to move the general to better cover. Nadia dialed her scope to match the distance. The wind wasn't terrible, but it drifted across the bowl from left to right in lazy, invisible rivers. She watched the plumes of snow off nearby peaks, gauged their direction, felt it on the skin of her cheek. She settled the crosshairs at an offset just to the left of the sniper's exposed cheekbone. Her finger curled around the trigger. The weight of the rifle sat comfortably in her shoulder, anchored against rock. Her carbon fiber foot dug deeper into the snow. The world narrowed to a tiny circle of glass and a single, rising respiratory curve. She squeezed. The rifle cracked, a sound like a door slamming open. On the pinnacle, the sniper jerked. His body sagged sideways, knocking the rifle off its rest. The weapon tumbled, clattering down the rocks, bouncing until it lodged in a drift. The man's head lolled at an unnatural angle. One down. She racked the bolt, brass flipping over her shoulder, fresh round sliding in. Before anyone down there fully processed what had just happened on that high perch, she swung the muzzle in a smooth arc toward the jammer team. The leader was easy to spot. Headset, thicker jacket, the posture of someone who believed he was safe behind his tech. He leaned over the control box, twisting a knob, shouting orders she couldn't hear. She breathed, adjusted for the slightly shorter distance and a fraction more wind, and squeezed again. The round hit him square in the chest. His body snapped backward, arms flung wide. He crashed into the generator, knocking it sideways. Panic rippled through the crew around him. One grabbed the headset, shouted into it. Another scrambled to catch the tilting equipment. The neat script in their heads started to unravel. Down in the pass, fire from the north ridge wavered noticeably. On the road, a sergeant dragging the general by his vest toward a better snow berm felt the pressure ease on his shoulders for half a second. He didn't know why, but he knew an opening when he felt one. "Move, move," he yelled, hauling the general up and half carrying him across the road in a low crouch. Rounds still smacked into the snow around them, but the patter had changed. Less precise, less sure. In the command truck's shadow, another bodyguard saw the sniper's perch now empty, the jammer team in chaos, and realized someone else was on their side. He didn't have time to wonder who. On the ridges, the enemy commander, wearing a weathered scarf and carrying an old rifle more for authority than use, felt the change, too. He swore under his breath and snatched a pair of binoculars from a subordinate, scanning the heights. "There," he snapped, pointing at the spur where a faint muzzle flash faded. "Above us. Higher than planned." He grabbed the shoulder of a fighter next to him. "Send the climbers. And get the drone off observation. Find that shooter." Above, the small quadcopter that had been lazily circling the pass twitched. It pivoted, camera tilting, and began a slow arc toward Nadia's position. She saw it in the corner of her scope view, a tiny insect speck against the sky. It would find her eventually. Once it did, the mortar that had been sitting and used so far, a tube she'd noticed near the commander's group, would start punching holes into her piece of rock. She had maybe 2 shots before that happened. Maybe 3. She made them count. 2 heavy machine gun teams were set up on the north face, one slightly above the other. The lower one had already been suppressed when its gunner hesitated, catching a glimpse of the sniper falling. The upper one was still intact, chewing into the road whenever anyone moved. She swung to the upper nest, saw the gunner rise from behind a shield, eyes on the pass. She put the crosshairs at the base of his throat and squeezed. He dropped like a sack of meat, hands spasming open, the belt-fed weapon coughing out one last burst before going still. She shifted down, took the second team's gunner as he leaned in to take over for his fallen comrade. 2 bodies, 2 ruined firing positions. On the ridge, someone shouted, gestured frantically up at her spur. The drone kept coming, its rotors a faint whine. The air around Nadia felt thinner. The exertion of the climb, the focus of the shots. It would be easy to get sloppy now, to hurry. She exhaled, forcing her heart rate down. The drone hovered for a moment, camera pointed right at her. It suddenly had weight, that glass, the way it seemed to see not just her shape, but her intent. She tracked it through her scope, found the point where the body met the nearest rotor arm, and squeezed. The round took it there. One of the rotors shattered. The drone wobbled wildly, spun, and then dropped like a stunned bird, smashing into a snowbank halfway down the slope. Every fighter watching it sucked in a breath. For an instant, there was silence, no one quite believing the tiny tyrant had just died. Then the enemy commander spat on the ground and started barking orders. If Tech couldn't solve this, Muscle would. He grabbed a pair of lean climbers by their webbing and pointed up the concealed route that edged toward Nadia's spur. They moved, fast and efficient, no wasted motion. Each carried a carbine, grenades clipped to their vests. A mortar crew scrambled near them, muscle memory bringing tube and baseplate together in seconds. They sighted the first round, not precise, just a general bracket at Nadia's approximate elevation, and dropped it down the tube. The thunk floated across the distance. Nadia heard it and felt her stomach tighten. "Here we go," she murmured. She slid sideways along the spur, snow dragging at her body. The first mortar round hit just below where she'd been, the blast punching a crater into the ridge and sending a cloud of snow and rock fragments roaring upward. Some of the debris slapped into her. Something stung the side of her face. Another bit chipped the edge of her scope, knocking it slightly off kilter. Her ears rang. For a moment, the world went muffled, like she was underwater. She tasted metal. She rolled, putting a thicker chunk of rock between herself and the mortar team's line of sight. The rifle lay beside her, scope askew. "Okay," she told herself. "Okay, check." She wiped a glove thumb across the lens, cleared dust and frozen moisture, then found a distinctive rock outcropping in the distance she knew the exact range to. She took a quick sight picture, fired a test round, saw where it hit in relation to the target, and adjusted the scope's turrets accordingly. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough for the kind of shots she needed now. She crawled farther along the spur, leaving a faint groove where the prosthetic's edge plowed through the snow. Below, further left than before, she had a new angle on the battlefield. A quick glance into her mag pouch told her a grim story. She'd burned through more rounds than she'd intended. Enough for the high-priority targets, yes, but not much extra. Waste was no longer an option in any sense. She pared her mental target list even further. No more shots at opportunistic shooters, only at the nodes. The enemy commander had taken the dead jammer leader's headset now, shouting into it, relaying fragmented messages. He also stood too tall, too exposed, gesturing broadly. He was the brain. Kill the brain. You turn a careful plan into a mess. Nadia looked at him through the scope. He stood behind a jagged gap in the rocks, only half of his torso visible at any given second as he turned and gestured. Wind gusted across her. She adjusted a hair. He lifted his head to shout at the mortar crew. She threaded the shot through the gap and squeezed. The round walked that narrow corridor of air like it had been waiting for it. It punched into his upper chest, just below the collarbone. The headset flew off. His feet came out from under him. He hit the rocks hard and didn't get up. For a heartbeat, the jammer's hum wobbled. Then one of the panicking subordinates lunged for the controls, tripped over the fallen commander, and yanked out a cable. The device went silent. Down in the pass, radios clicked and suddenly spit out sound again. Convoy Gold. This is Phoenix Station. We lost you for contact. Contact multiple enemy positions. We are in the kill zone. The sergeant in charge of the general's protection yelled into his handset, words tumbling over each other. We need immediate support, grid. The outpost exploded into motion. Quick reaction units sprinted for vehicles. An air controller snatched his headset up properly for the first time in an hour. In the pass, the sergeant who'd hauled the general into the thicker snow berm saw smoke from the jammer area stuttering. Fire from the north face was now disorganized and sporadic. He took the chance. On me, he shouted to the nearest soldiers. We bound to that rock shelf. We stay here, we die here. Under cover of their own returning fire, using fresh smoke grenades, they hustled the general a few meters at a time toward a more defensible outcrop of rock. For every meter they gained, 1 or 2 rounds chewed into the snow where they'd just been. Nadia saw them moving and adjusted her focus slightly. An RPG team had shifted position in response to the earlier chaos, now setting up in a spot with a clean angle on the moving cluster of friendly bodies. The gunner rose, launcher on his shoulder. Nadia burned 2 rounds on him and his assistant, one after the other, feeling each trigger pull like a subtraction in her mental ledger. Both went down before they could fire. The RPG clattered from the gunner's hands and slid harmlessly away. Closer now. Always closer. She heard the climbers before she saw them. The scrape of metal on rock. The faint grunt of effort, closer than any of the other sounds. They were using the groove her own movements had left as a guide, following the path she'd carved up to this impossible perch. She considered pivoting her rifle down along the slope, catching them as they climbed. The thought lasted only a fraction of a second. The capture team near the command truck had recovered from the sudden losses and were making their move. Through her scope, she saw them break from cover. One hurled a smoke grenade that began to billow opaque gray between them and the protective detail. Another slung his rifle and grabbed a compact stun device from his belt. They were going to rush the ditch, overwhelm the close protection with non-lethal blasts, and drag the general onto that reinforced sled waiting further up. If they succeeded, everything else she'd done would be a footnote to failure. She kept the rifle where it was. Her breathing was ragged now, not from fear but from sheer exertion and altitude. Her leg throbbed where the mortar shrapnel had grazed the socket, sending little spikes of pain with every twitch. 3 rounds, she whispered, counting. Maybe 4 if I miscounted optimistically earlier. The first of the capture team hit the edge of the smoke wall and vanished into it, heading for the ditch. She tracked the second, just behind him, a little more cautious, glancing up as if some part of him realized death might fall from that direction. She put a round into his sternum. He folded. The man behind him stumbled over his collapsing body, catching a lance of panic in his eyes. Nadia shifted to the left, taking the third man in line as he tried to veer out of that fatal lane. Another squeeze, another body dropped into the snow. Movement flickered at the edge of her vision. One of the climbers, cresting a lip not far below her. She didn't look. If she did, fear would grab her by the neck and turn her rifle in a direction that, while personally useful, would cost them a battle. Her rifle bucked again, and the 4th member of the team, who had just caught sight of the general's helmet over the trench lip, snapped backward, the stun device flying from his hand. Someone in the ditch shouted in stunned surprise as the smoke cleared enough to reveal the heap of bodies between the sled team and their prize. The mortar crew got their range right on the next round. It detonated so close to Nadia's previous position that the concussion rolled over her in a physical wave. Snow blew sideways across the spur. She was flung onto her back, the rifle nearly torn from her grip. Something hot sliced across the edge of her prosthetic's attachment point at her thigh. Pain flared like lightning. For a moment, she saw nothing but white and red. She grabbed the rifle by instinct, dragging it back against her chest, rolled until she found a hollow in the rock where the next blast might hit only the upper edge instead of her whole body. Her hands shook now, not from fear but from sheer shock and adrenaline. She looked down at her magazines. 1, 2 rounds inside, maybe 3. That was it. On the road, amid the chaos, a single fighter broke from the south ridge, sprinting low. He carried a bulky satchel cradled to his chest, moving not toward the general but toward the command truck, where the gray metal case still sat, half visible through a bent door. He meant to blow it, Nadia realized, or snatch in the chaos and drag it back under the sled team's cover. The contents of that case were unknown to her, but she'd seen the way it had been guarded, the way the local driver had looked at it, the weight the general had given it in his body language. It was worth enough to murder a convoy for. Letting it be taken would make this not just an ambush, but a strategic catastrophe. Nadia rolled onto her side, fighting the vertigo from the concussion. Her ears roared. The world was a little tilted now. The crosshairs wobbled as her hands tried to steady. The runner moved fast, boots kicking up snow, satchel tight. He was only exposed fully for seconds at a time as he weaved between churning bodies and wreckage. She found him, lost him, found him again. She exhaled everything she had, letting her body drop into that practiced stillness she'd earned long before she ever set foot on these mountains. Her finger tightened. The last round snapped from the barrel. Down below, the runner jerked as if yanked sideways by an invisible hook. The satchel flew from his hand, skidding into a harmless drift. His body slid a meter, then went still. Nadia's rifle clicked empty on the reset. The sound was strangely loud. She lay there, chest heaving, the metal of the gun cold against her cheek. Her world had shrunk now to breath, trembling muscles, and the distant, shifting shapes of men who now had no idea that the threat above them had just gone silent. On the ridges, some of the fighters saw their commander's body, the smoking ruin of their jammer, the broken drone, the dead sniper on the pinnacle. They saw quick-reaction vehicles cresting a distant slope, rushing toward the pass with fresh weapons and angry engines. They heard the overhead whine of air support checking in over restored radio frequencies. Their perfect plan looked suddenly full of holes. Cohesion broke. Some tried to rally. Others began to fall back along their escape routes, abandoning weapons for speed. A few dug in, stubborn, determined to inflict as much damage as possible on the way out. The capture team that remained alive pulled back from the ditch, realizing their window was gone. In the pass, the sergeant with the general took a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Whoever's up there," he muttered, half prayer, half gratitude, "don't stop." On the spur, Nadia pressed her thumb to her radio's transmit button. "Phoenix Station," she rasped. Her throat felt raw. "This is Rios. High position above the pass. I'm black on ammo. Enemy elements are," she coughed, swallowed blood. "North Ridge, mid and upper elevations. South Ridge, Shepherd Trail line. Remaining force, trying to withdraw east. Captain, capture team degraded. Principal alive. Repeat, principal alive." This time, the reply came clear and strong, cut through with relief and urgency. "Rios, this is Phoenix. Copy all. QRF is 2 minutes from your grid. Air assets on station in 5. Can you laze or mark targets?" "Negative," she said, glancing at the empty rifle. "No laser, no ammo. Just eyes." "Eyes are enough," the voice said. "Stay on the net. Talk them in." She did. She turned her battered binoculars toward the ridges and started calling out positions, guiding the quick-reaction vehicle's mounted guns and the mounting suppressive fire from the convoy survivors. Her descriptions were crisp despite the pain. Little reference points. 2 men behind the bent spruce above the western rocks. Mortar crew just left of the broken pinnacle, near the half-buried boulder, that translated into precise bursts of machine gun chatter and grenades. Her leg felt like it was on fire where the shrapnel had grazed the tissue near the socket. Every time she shifted, small lights danced at the edge of her vision. She ignored them. Fear was still there, down in the basement of her mind, reminding her that climbers were close, that another mortar round might still come her way, that she was alone up here. Function sat on top of it, heavy and deliberate, focusing her actions into a narrow beam. By the time the first quick reaction truck skidded into the pass, soldiers jumping out with fresh ammo and wide eyes, the ridges were already emptying. The enemy who had planned to walk away with a captured general and a stolen intelligence case were instead leaving bodies, burned ammo, and a shattered jammer behind. The fight didn't end with a bang, so much as a slow, sputtering series of spurts. Isolated shooters, unwilling to disengage, popped shots until the overwhelming weight of returning fire silenced them. One last rocket streak from a high perch spiraled uselessly into the sky and detonated against bare rock. Then gradually the gunfire thinned. Shouts replaced shots. Orders, not screams. Snow fell again from the disturbed heights, softer this time, like the mountains are trying to cover what had just happened. By the time a medic team fought its way up a safer side route to Nadia's spur, the sun had already begun its slow descent. The white glare of midday softened into something with more shadow in it. They found her propped against the rock where she'd first set up, rifle across her lap, eyes still glued to the binoculars even though the battlefield below had turned mostly to smoke wisps and sorting crews. "Sergeant," one of them said, kneeling, "you with us?" She blinked, turned her head slightly. Her pupils tracked properly. She nodded once. "Yeah," she said, voice hoarse. "I'm here. Let's take a look at that leg," the medic said, already reaching for the straps around the socket. "And the shrapnel in your side. And the fact that you look like you've been through a blender." "Convoy?" she asked. "General's alive," the medic said. "Lot of wounded. Could have been worse. Could have been, well, you know." Nadia closed her eyes briefly. A long breath left her. "Good," she said. "Then you can carry me down. I'm tired of doing all the work around here." He huffed a half-laugh, shook his head, and signaled for the stretcher. By late afternoon, the pass had quieted again, but the quiet was nothing like the morning's peace. Bodies lay under tarps or blankets, tagged and numbered. Spent casings littered the snow like brass confetti, glinting dully in the fading light. Wrecked vehicles smoldered or had been hosed down, leaving strange black puddles in the white landscape. Medics knelt over the wounded, bandaging, inserting IVs, murmuring reassurances. Engineers evaluated the structural integrity of the road. A recovery team tried to figure out how to move the lead vehicle's hulking carcass off the main track. The general sat on a makeshift seat, a wooden crate dragged over beside a temporary command post, a dressing peeking out from under his collar where a bullet fragment had grazed him. He held a bottle of water loosely in one hand and rested the other on the gray metal case now backed by his boots. His eyes were not on the case, though. They were on the tent where Nadia had been taken. Inside, a small propane heater hissed. The light had an artificial yellow tint. Nadia lay on a cot, one pant leg rolled up to expose the junction where carbon met skin. The medic had cleaned the wound at the socket's edge and wrapped it, leaving a neat, white band of gauze that contrasted sharply with the bruised flesh around it. Her rifle leaned against the metal frame of the bed, within easy reach. The barrel was still dusty, the stock scratched where rock had kissed it. Her hands shook slightly on the blanket, a faint tremor that came and went. The flap parted. The general stepped in, ducking automatically. He let the flap fall behind him, shutting out some of the noise from outside. Engines shouted distances, the low murmur of ongoing triage. "Clear the room," he said quietly. The medic hesitated, looked between them, then nodded and slipped out. The general stood at the foot of the cot for a moment, staring. His gaze went to her leg first. Couldn't help it. His eyes were used to counting bodies, cataloging damage. He saw the bandages, the metal, the way it all joined in a line that was both ugly and defiant. Then he looked at her face, at the fine network of small cuts from rock shrapnel, the bruising already blooming along one cheekbone, and the eyes that met his without flinching. He noticed the tremor in her fingers as she tried to still them. "Sergeant Rios," he said. "Sir," she replied. He took a breath, let it out slowly, as if picking through words in his head and discarding most of them. "Do you know what was in that case you just killed half a platoon to keep out of enemy hands?" he asked. No, sir, she said. All I saw was that they wanted it too much. That drive contains the locations and true names of every local asset we have from here to the border, he said. Human sources, electronic sensors, safe houses. If they'd taken it, they wouldn't just have been able to dismantle our network. They'd have burned every person who ever stuck their neck out for us in this province. She absorbed that. Images flashed, unbidden. Faces of local fixers who'd come to the outpost for money and whispered favors. The smuggler who quietly passed them tips about mines on back roads. The schoolteacher who'd risked his job to tell them about strange men in the hills. Then that would have been bad, she said, voice very even. He huffed something that might have been a laugh, though there was no humor in it. The investigation team has already started pulling threads, he went on. We picked up our nervous local logistic contractor trying to slip out of town 2 hours after the first explosion. His phone was full of messages from one particular number. We tracked it to a safe house in the nearest town. We've already hit it. And, Nadia asked, money, propaganda scripts, video equipment, and a plan, he said. They were going to grab me alive, if possible. March me in front of camera with that case. Make me read something nice about our withdrawal, their victory, and how we can't protect our friends. Then they'd put that video out, along with the real names they'd pulled off those drives, and watch this whole region collapse into fear and payback killings. He sat down on an empty crate beside her cot, his movements slower than they had been that morning. The fight had added years to his joints. I'll be honest, Sergeant, he said after a pause. When I read your file, I didn't see a quiet professional. I saw a red mark. An operation gone wrong, a deviation from the plan, a casualty on our side. I saw a lost leg, an unauthorized repositioning, and my brain turned that into risk factor. She looked up at the tent ceiling for a moment. The canvas had a few stains from previous leaks, brownish watermarks in odd shapes. She'd stared at similar patterns in other tents in other countries. Unauthorized repositioning, she repeated, a bitter smile at the corner of her mouth. That's one way to drag her squad leader out of mortar kill zone after command insisted they hold position in a bad spot. I've read more of the report since then, he said quietly. The full report. Not the summary. Not the little red mark. But I read that yesterday. Not before this morning. He rubbed his forehead with his thumb and forefinger. When you spoke up in the briefing, all I saw was that mark, he admitted, in your leg. And my schedule. I saw a woman who'd already been in one bad ambush warning me that every shadow might have an enemy behind it. And I let my impatience and my bias make the call. Sir, she started. He held up a hand. I was wrong, he said. Not just about the plan. About you. Your gut feelings were pattern recognition. Your overanalysis was you seeing the signs others missed. And your unauthorized repositioning is the reason I'm sitting here talking to you instead of being paraded on some propaganda channel. The tremor in her hands had lessened as he spoke. She realized it only when she lowered them, flexing her fingers against the blanket. I disobeyed orders today, she said. You know that. I gave the wrong order, he replied. You corrected it. I can dress that up later in the paperwork. However, I needed to keep headquarters happy. But that's the truth of it. He reached down and picked up her rifle, weighing it in his hands carefully, as if it might break. His fingers traced the scratches along the stock, the small chip part on the scope where shrapnel had hit. Once upon a time, he said slowly, I was the one climbing to the ugly positions while the older men sat on radios. I remember what it felt like to be dismissed with a smile, because I didn't fit someone's idea of what a reliable operator looked like. I told myself I'd never be that man. He looked at her, really looked this time, not at the leg, not at the paperwork he'd once skimmed. Today I was exactly that man, he said. She shifted, the movement sending a spike of pain through her thigh. She winced, but met his gaze steadily. I don't need an apology, sir, she said. I just need you to listen next time. He nodded once. What do you want now, he asked. Going forward, if I send a recommendation up the chain, they'll stamp it. You've earned that much and more. Rec, she said, tasting the word. It felt almost schoolyard in the moment. You can recommend I stop getting put where I look safe instead of where I'm useful. He waited. I want to be where I can see the field, she said finally. Overwatch, reconnaissance, training others to not miss what you all missed this week. I don't care what the slot's called. Just don't waste me behind a desk and act like you're doing me a kindness. He sat with that for a moment. Outside, someone shouted for more bandages. A vehicle's engine roared as it pulled a wreck out of the way. I can do that, he said. There will be questions from the lawyers, from safety, from those who think we should have stuck to the book even harder. Let them ask, she said. Just make sure they also see the footage of what happens when you don't let someone with one leg climb. He chuckled softly then, a sound with a little more life in it. There's talk of medals already, he said. They like their stories neat. Wounded warrior saves general. Shooter with a metal leg turns the tide in the snow. They'll probably want you to say something stirring about resilience and second chances. She looked back up at the stained canvas. They can write whatever they want, she said, voice gentle but firm. I don't need a ceremony. I don't need a speech. I just want to show up on the next op brief and not have everyone in the room decide in advance where I belong. He set the rifle back against the cot, barrel up like one might lean an old tool that had just done a good day's work. When he left the tent, the evening light caught his face differently. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, but the set of his jaw less arrogant. As he stepped out, several of the younger soldiers nearby straightened unconsciously, eyes tracking between him and the tent flap. They watched as the medics wheeled Nadia out a few minutes later, bundled under blankets, her rifle lying across her legs like a strange, familiar pet. The looks were not the same as they'd been that morning. There was no awkwardness now, no quick averted gazes at her limb. There was something like embarrassment in some of the faces, something like awe in others. One private, barely shaving, adjusted the sling on his rifle as she passed, mimicking unconsciously the way she always set hers, slightly higher on the chest, ready to slide in a firing position with minimal movement. She caught the motion, recognized it, and lifted one hand in a small salute. The private reddened but smiled. Days later, the mountains looked the same from a distance. Snow didn't care about blown-up trucks or restructured intel networks. It fell where it wanted, melted when it had to, and occasionally slid in avalanches that erased every footprint as if no one had ever walked there. On a different ridge, above a different piece of road and a different village, Nadia lay prone behind her rifle once more. The bruise on her cheek had turned yellow and green. The bandage at her socket had been replaced by a slightly altered fit, tighter in some places, looser in others, the prosthetic adjusted to account for the new scar tissue. The radio beside her murmured occasionally. Patrols checking in. A liaison unit joking about coffee running out. She scanned the snowfield below, looking for the little ghost she'd learned to trust. A curve in the wrong place, a heat signature where there shouldn't be any, a line of prints that didn't match the local herd patterns. Every so often, memory flashed, the roar of the mortar, the snapping bolt, the strange silence after her last shot. She let the images come, acknowledged them, and then filed them in the place where they turned into lessons rather than anchors. Behind her, out of sight, the general's case sat in a secure room many kilometers away, its drive duplicated, its contents now guarded by new protocols that took into account how close they had come to losing everything. Down below, villagers started to move along the road again, cautious at first, then more naturally, as word spread that the ambush had failed, that the men who had tried to turn the mountains into a theater of fear had been prevented from doing so. History, Nadia knew, would remember the ambush in its own way. Reports would condense it into paragraphs. News stories, if any, would show neat graphics, arrows, and red circles representing explosions and positions. Some would tell it as a story about a general who nearly died. Some would turn it into a lesson about intelligence leaks and countermeasures. She saw it differently. She'd remember the way the snow had exploded around the trucks. The moment the machine gun's line of fire crawled toward the ditch where a man she didn't particularly like but still needed had been cowering. The feel of her damaged body clinging to a cliff it had no business on. The cold, immediate decision to shoot away from herself and toward others. She'd remember the shouting and the fire, yes. But more than that, she'd remember the quiet that came after. The stillness where choices settled into shape. Wind tug at the edge of her hood. She adjusted her scope, tracking a distant, innocuous figure. A shepherd this time, real, walking where he should. On the radio, a voice crackled. "Overwatch, this is Patrol 3. Anything interesting up there?" She pressed the transmit button, eyes still on the glass. "Not today," she said. "Just snow and good decisions." "Copy that," the voice said, easy. "We'll try not to ruin it." She let a small smile slip over her face, faint and private. They'd remember the ambush for the smoke, the noise, the close call with cameras, and catastrophe. The men who'd been in that pass would tell the story over and over again, the details changing slightly with each retelling. Nadia would remember it for something else entirely, for the moment when doing her job, on a ledge nobody thought she should be on, finally spoke louder than the scars everyone else had been staring at.